Welcome to this episode of The Chart. This is the first episode we're going to be doing on our series on personal finance. Today we're going to be talking about good debt versus bad debt. And with me, as always, is Jeff Myers.
Hey, John, how's it going?
It's going good. Jeff, give the people your credentials so we know that the advice you give out is actually worthwhile and good.
Yeah, absolutely. So I currently am a portfolio manager for an independent RIA, registered investment advisor in St. Louis, Missouri. I hold my certified financial planner designation, series 7 and 66, so government licensed for investment advice. I also have my financial modeling and valuation analyst certification, and then currently working on my CFA level 2 right now. So that's chartered financial analyst.
And you work in the financial industry as well. We don't need to give out the name, but you
Right.
it is your day-to-day job.
Yeah, exactly. All day, every day.
Great. All right. So today we're talking about good debt versus bad debt. It's kind of like the starting block for a lot of personal finance. Can we just get into like what is debt and how does it work
Yeah.
and how does it fit into your personal situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of a high level intro for what debt is. The easiest way to think about it is the ability to kind of take your future earnings and make them available to you right now. And so that can be in many formats, whether that's a personal loan, a mortgage, an auto loan, credit cards, student loans. There's a lot of different ways that you as the consumer have access to those future earnings, and a lot of different avenues where you can pick those up. So I think that's really important is kind of knowing that there are a lot of things available to you, but it's just a way to help you kind of in certain instances achieve goals and in other instances kind of spend currently.
Sure. What is like in contrast to debt? So is it assets or is it income? Like just so kind of we understand where debt fits into the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely. So debt usually is considered a negative on your
Okay.
balance sheet if you're looking at kind of your net worth. You have assets, whether that is in the equity of your home, your financial assets. You have valuable, baseball cards. Those are kind of positives, and then the negatives you have are usually going to be that debt. So if you have a house that you bought for $250,000, you got a mortgage on it for $225,000, you have $25,000 of equity there on the house, and you're paying off that debt over time until you are the 100% owner of that asset, your house.
Okay. That makes sense. What oftentimes when you hear debt, you hear people talk about there's the good kind of debt and like the bad kind of debt. I don't that doesn't make sense to me. It feels like all debt should be bad or all debt should be fretted over.
Sure.
So can you kind of go like what's good debt? Let's break it down. Is there such a thing as good debt and what is it?
So I think what's really important in this instance as it relates to debt is the way that you as the individual approach that debt. So most of the time, like you said, like you feel, debt is not good because what it does is it allows people instant gratification, and it allows them to maybe buy something that they want right now but don't necessarily need. And then unfortunately, it puts them in a bad situation down the road as they attempt to pay that off. Um, on the flip side of that, though, debt can be used in a positive manner. I think that debt, absolutely, in terms of buying a house, is a really good benefit, especially with interest rates being low. And we'll get into this at a later topic, but buying a house is a really good first step for a lot of young families. And not everyone has $250,000 of cash lying around to be able to buy a house. So using debt to finance that purchase, I think, is a really good form.
What in particular kind of makes it okay? Well, instead of making good, why don't we compare it to like a bad form of debt? So you said you think mortgages can be a good form of debt. A bad form of debt would be car payment.
Not necessarily. I think we talked about this in a prior episode, right, where we talked about Dave Ramsey and
Hmm.
how much he dislikes credit cards. I
Hmm.
think, and this is tough because I think in every situation there's a good and bad. I'm relatively gray in a lot of areas, right? So I don't think that one thing is always bad necessarily, or one thing is always good.
Sure.
Of course, there are going to be certain circumstances where that is true. But as it relates to debt, I think there's a good and a bad form of just about every form of debt. If you look at companies, issuing debt for a company to be able to expand their warehouses or their production or take on new hires, like that stuff's good. It's beneficial for the economy and the company, and then eventually new hires as well. I think, if we're really looking at what is bad, unfortunately what's bad is going to be us, the consumer, right? So credit cards can be really bad because people can use them to pay for things that they don't need and then dig themselves into a hole that they're unable to pay their way out of. And I think that's when it gets really detrimental. It can be really, really negative.
Okay. I want to talk about that hole that you can get yourself into in that process, because I
Yep.
think that's the trap with debt, right? Like that's, a loan you pay back on time, who cares? Like that's
Right.
fine.
Right.
The problem with debt is that trap you can fall into, and like how does that happen? What are the mechanisms at play? What are ways to avoid that? Just kind of in general terms. Obviously, I mean, as the series goes on, we'll talk about each type of debt more specifically and kind of the nuances of it.
Right.
But the general idea of debt and that kind of debt trap, can you kind of dig into it? And specifically, like, is it just because of interest rates, or is there more to it?
Yeah. So I would say it's probably not just because of interest rates.
Okay.
But I would say that probably the most nefarious form of debt is going to be the minimum payment. So
Okay.
everyone talks about minimum payment, right? Oh, you
Mm.
can get a car loan for a minimum payment of $200 a month. Or you can get this credit card and you can have whatever balance, but your minimum payment's only $30 a month. So that's totally manageable, right?
Right.
But what people end up missing in that front is, what you don't realize is that minimum payment extends the life of the debt to a very, very, very long timeline, essentially. So
What is when it says minimum of what?
essentially the minimum is really just covering the interest payments. It's a little bit different for every type of loan that you have. So for example, I think credit cards have a daily interest rate. So they're daily calculating your interest rate. So if you have a credit card that's 18%,
Hmm.
it's taking 18% divided by 365 every single day. That interest rate is calculated and added to your payment. So over the course of 30 days or a month, you are going to be paying down that interest plus a little bit of the principal. And it's basically the amount that is required to keep you current, essentially. Um, it's different, like I said, for each type of loan, but it's basically the minimum that you have to pay to keep it afloat and to keep that company who's holding your debt from coming against you.
Okay. So just so as an example, let's say I have a credit card. Let's say I put $1,000 on it. I charge $1,000 to it. So I have $1,000 debt to whatever Chase or whatever credit card company.
Yep.
The minimum payment would be, if I just paid the minimum every month, that $1,000 would not go down, or would go down slightly.
It would go down slightly, right? So a portion of that minimum payment will go to cover the interest charge, and a portion of it will go to cover principal. But
Right.
as you make that payment, what actually happens is it will go down slightly, but interest is still building on that principal. So you're only chipping away at it a little bit. Um, this probably would have been a good example of something to pull up, but there's a calculator online you can look at to see how long, if you have a certain balance on your credit card and the minimum payments $35 a month or something, how long it actually takes you to pay down
Hmm.
without adding any more to that credit card. And it's something ridiculous, like 10 to 20 to 30 months to
Oh, wow.
actually pay down even a small balance, which most people don't realize because they're just thinking, oh, the minimum payment, I can keep doing this.
Right.
And
So
that's really how I think you end up digging yourself into that kind of hole.
right. And so the minimum payment is the minimum the company needs you to pay in order so they can continue to lend you more money, essentially.
Yep, exactly. To keep that line of credit open.
Okay. So that's uh not evil, but it ain't right,
Yeah,
like it's
right.
interesting. So okay. That's unfortunate that that's what they do and that's how they market that, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's really how they reel people in, because if you market on the minimum payment front, then just about anyone thinks, "Oh, I can pay
Right.
30 or 40 or $50 a month. That's not a big deal. And I can get, this brand new $500 Xbox. Heck yeah, I want to do
Right.
that." And that's not really they're again, it's that pulling their future earnings into today to be able to spend them on something and not realizing the impact that it has to them down the road.
So it seems like what they're doing is the company's almost manipulating them to throw away future earnings, or to not throw away, but how about imprudently or unwisely spend
Lock
those
them up.
future. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's converting your future time in dollars and absorbing them up in the current period.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that we face a lot in the financial industry, right? Because our goal as financial professionals working with clients is to help them delay that instant gratification and to
Right.
think about their future and plan for it by saving today
Uh-huh.
rather than pulling down that future earnings to spend today. That's what we're trying to fight against.
Right. And so generally, I would imagine obviously the way to get out of it then is to pay more than the minimum payment.
Yep.
Right. And so I think something about this that is interesting is that, like, the longer that payment period is, it seems like the more you're charged, right? Like
Yep.
the longer you wait to pay that debt off, the more interest is on you, and the more expensive it gets.
Yeah, because that interest is always accruing.
Hmm.
Every single credit card statement is going to have, if you maintain a balance month to month, will always have an interest charge on there.
So with debt, time is of the essence. The faster you
Hmm.
pay it off, the cheaper it is for you.
Yep, absolutely. And that's why so much of this ends up coming down to kind of a mentality or a behavior, because if you can kind of really focus yourself on paying things down, then debt can really be an advantage to you. If
Right.
you know, hey, I am actively aware that what I'm doing is cutting down future earnings to purchase something today, but I know I have a plan of attack to take care of it. I'm aware, I've budgeted for it, that type of thing, then it really can be beneficial. And I think that's where it's really important, like on the front of mortgages. If you know that you can afford $1,000 a month mortgage for 30 years and you need a house, that's not necessarily a bad way to use those funds to pull that future earnings down, because as you make money over time, you'll make more than that ideally, and you stay and pay off this house, it can become an asset to you.
Hmm. Great. That's good to know. But so it is good to know that debt isn't just a thing to be avoided that'll suck all your future away from you.
Right.
There is a way to use debt to provide value and to
Right.
not ruin your life.
Yeah, and I think the key is recognizing that debt in and of itself is not an evil, but it's
Right.
usually those companies behind it that are issuing that debt that are leading you down the wrong path that ends up making it bad.
So it seems like kind of rule of thumb that people should be uh, wary when it comes to debt. Like, it seems like it's like there's going to be traps. There's going to be,
Yep,
so when opening a credit card, when doing all that stuff, be careful. Is that the general advice when it comes to debt? Be
absolutely.
careful. They will try and get you.
Yeah, yeah,
You
and
people, you
plan
financial
ahead.
people.
Yeah, yeah, and I think really the biggest thing is just planning ahead for that, right? If you're gonna go and get a car loan and you know that you can afford, I don't know, $300 a month for a car payment, don't go and tell the car salesman that you want a car and you're only going to pay $300 a month, because they're going to push you to pay 320, 350, 400 because they know where you want to be. But if you go in and say, I want a car that costs this much money, and I
Hmm.
know that the payment associated that will be 250 or 200, that's where I'm going to stick to. You've planned ahead, you've budgeted for that, and
Right.
you've given yourself some wiggle room there. If you find the perfect car that is going to end up costing 275 a month, that's still under budget, but it's over what you told that person. That
Right.
type of thing is really the way to plan for that.
Okay. So the goal with debt is knowledge. Know what you're
Right.
getting into. Don't trust the salesman. Don't trust the companies, because they're allowed to or willing to do kind of some shady things to kind of drag you along and string you along and kind of get as much money out of you as they can.
Yeah, it's like Apple's what is it, term of
Terms and
the big
conditions.
long,
Yeah.
terms and conditions. Nobody reads that stuff. Just
Yeah.
like your debt contracts, every form of debt that you get has a big long contract. Most people don't read them. There's a lot of stuff that can be hidden in that you aren't aware of that's going to trip you up.
That's good to know. So I think as a general kind of debt primer or debt introduction, I think this is pretty good. Is there anything you think we're missing or should discuss or that people should be aware of, or can we go on and get into specific types of debt?
Yeah, I think let's dive in.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is the first episode. We're talking about good debt and bad debt. There'll be more to come where we kind of get into the specifics of debt and other things personal finance related. Jeff, thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.
Thanks, John.